Darth Vader is somebody that we don't typically think of settling down in one place. For the majority of his appearances, we see him on the move, and mostly living in his Star Destroyer known as the Executor. It was mostly on the Executor that Vader spent a good portion of his life, especially after the events of the Clone Wars and Mustafar. Once Vader was able to get control of his new body, he would live constantly in motion as he hunted down Jedi survivors. He barely stopped for any downtime because downtime meant having to deal with his memories and regrets of Padme, as well as his life as Anakin. His existence on the Executor would continue, especially through the Great Galactic Civil War, as he dealt with the Rebel Alliance and hunted down the young Luke Skywalker. However, in recent years, we have had a peek behind the curtain and discovered that there really was a place where Vader hung his helmet, his fortress on Mustafar. Recent canon has placed a great deal of emphasis on this fortress, and it has been seen and explored through many of the canon comics. Though there was a second place that Vader called his home in Legends continuity, and we are led to believe that this may have been the place that Vader really cared about above Mustafar. My friends, in today's holocron, we are going to be talking about the Bast Castle, as well as why it was so important to Lord Vader in Legends. Fortress Vader on Mustafar is a canon exclusive, and it's not difficult to see why it made sense for Lord Vader to establish his home here. On Mustafar, he could overlook the lava beach, which was the site of his greatest failure. Vader ensured his castle was situated in the best possible location for him to channel the dark side itself. But in Legends, Vader didn't choose Mustafar as his home, but instead, he opted for the distant, Outer Rim world known as Vajun. It was here that Lord Vader staked claim to the Bast Castle. The Bast Castle was a palace already teeming with great importance. But first, let's explore the world of Vajun. Vajun is an almost lifeless world that is prone to acid rainfall. On top of this, it barely contains any plant life whatsoever. But what is most important about this planet is its power and connection with the dark side itself. Prior to Lord Vader staking claim of the world, there were a few people that called Vajun their home, and even the Bast Castle. Vajun's importance goes back centuries, as it was once a refuge for the Sith after the fall of the Great Sith Empire, all the way back to Naga Sadow and his defeat in the Great Hyperspace War, as his fleet was destroyed and the remaining Lords of the Sith scattered amongst the Outer Rim and wild space. At this point in the lore, there were still many Sith Lords, as they had all not been called back to Nathema and destroyed by Tenebrae, and thus were hiding out in refuge planets such as Vajun. With all these dark presences focused on one place and conducting their own dark side research, the planet was bound to become tainted with the dark side itself. But once the Sith were all gone, they left behind several dark adepts who formed various Sith cults on the world of Vajun, and would spread the Sith teachings to neighboring worlds. In one instance, a noblewoman by the name of Mary of Vajun would marry into another powerful and noble family in the Tobani sector. It was here where she would dig her fangs in and spread her Sith teachings and corrupt the noble house, eventually growing into a more powerful version of a Sith cult. But there was more to conquer, as the wealthiest family in the sector was known as the Malaru family, all of whom were force sensitive, which was extremely rare, and many of whom were susceptible to the dark side of the Force. It was here that the individual known as Viscount Malaru performed experiments on the midichlorians, much like Darth Plagueis would, but with terrifying effects, as by the year 29 BBY, his experiments had steeped through the entire planet, and every single inhabitant was insane, slaughtering one another in a frenzy. Most of the Malaru family were killed in this frenzy, and their only child was inducted into the Jedi Order, rescued by the light side itself. However, the world of Vajun lied within the bounds of separatist space in the era of the Clone Wars, and the Jedi were unable to save it. Eventually though, the Palace of Malaru was gifted to Count Dooku, who decided to make it his base of operations, finding the world appropriate for his newfound success in the dark side itself. Count Dooku would study the dark side extensively here and fortify it, renaming the palace the Bast Castle. The dead world of Vajun and the Bast Castle remained in Dooku's charge for the remainder of the Clone War, and it would be here that Dooku would lure his former Jedi Master in Yoda in an attempt to cause the Jedi Grandmaster to join the dark side, a story that is documented in the Legends novel Yoda Dark Rendezvous. And if you'd like to learn more about what happened when Yoda decided to go into the dark side for just a moment, be sure to check out our holocron we produced on the subject. Anyway, it was here that Vader would have his first encounter with the Bast Castle when he was still known as Anakin Skywalker. As Skywalker and Kenobi would show up on Vajun to help save Master Yoda, believing that he had been trapped there by Dooku. At the end of the Clone Wars, it isn't exactly certain why Vader chose Vajun specifically for his place of residence, though it likely has something to do with Dooku and the dark side power of the world. We know that Vader would grow a certain, albeit begrudging, respect for Dooku once he became a Sith Lord, realizing that over the course of the war, Dooku was his greatest teacher. In fact, Vader would implement many of Dooku's techniques into his own lightsaber form, including the use of Dun Mok, and it is possible that Vader decided to use the Bast Castle as a way to follow in Dooku's footsteps and learn more about why this planet was so important. Vader enjoyed the solitude that came with living in a barren wasteland of Vajun, and it was here where Vader studied the lore in his spare time, the lore of the Sith, just as Dooku had. In Legends, Vajun is also noted where the Dark Lord trained, slept, and fixed things. He had a whole training center set up for himself that ran entirely by droids, as there were very few staff. Vader enjoyed his solitude. In the hangar, he would tinker with his lightsaber as well as his starfighter. But what sets this place apart is that it is a known fact that this was the final resting place for a certain object, an object of great importance to Luke and the Jedi, that being Obi-Wan Kenobi's lightsaber. After recovering the lightsaber in their duel on the Death Star, Vader stored his previous master's saber as a trophy, putting it grandly in his castle, and often looked upon it as he pondered their final duel. Despite the planet and the Bast Castle belonging to several people before Vader, it was Vader's ownership of the place that would give Bast its dark legacy. The castle was most famous as Lord Vader's home, and as such, it attracted many dark acolytes of the Force following Vader's death. A dark side cultist would actually set up a statue of Lord Vader within the castle itself, deeming it a memorial to commemorate the Dark Lord of the Sith and his great and terrible deeds. The mad Force-sensitive clone, X1, also used the Bast Castle as a way to deepen his understanding of the dark side, looking through the lore left behind by Vader and manipulating the strong energies that were focused on the planet. It was also on Vajun that the false clone X1 declared himself yet again a false Sith Lord, before being killed by his brother known as X2. In the Dark Empire saga, the revived Lord Sidious would actually use the Bast Castle as a temporary hideout, using it to torture many Jedi under the statue of his own former apprentice. One of the last times, and perhaps the most famous times that we hear of the Bast Castle, is during the adventures of Kyle Katarn. Kyle Katarn of Luke Skywalker's new Jedi Order. Katarn, who ventured to the world to end the threat of the disciples of Ragnos, another dark side cult who had been using the scepter of Ragnos to drain the castle of its dark energy, using it so that they might hope that their ancient Dark Lord would be resurrected through its power, although the Jedi would ultimately defeat them. And thus, more or less, the story of Darth Vader's home, the Bast Castle. In our personal opinion, we find much more meaning in the castle on Mustafar, the destruction of Anakin Skywalker, and the birth of one Lord Vader. But now, we turn it over to you. What are your thoughts on the Bast Castle and the great history of Vajun? What are your thoughts on Darth Vader's second castle and the dark history that lie within its walls? As always, my friends, thank you so much for visiting our archives and engaging in our order. May the Force be with you always, and may you have a great day.